Strings of Malice, Book 1. Snowflake in an Alley. An old Mother Nonsense story. Chapter 19. The Story of the Rose. Wadal, 23rd Slarit. Lunreth, very slowly, became aware of gentle hands on him, the sound of running water, the scent of clean steam and fragrant soap. It was a strange way to wake up, and he vaguely wondered if this was the afterlife he'd been granted. Heavily, he opened his eyes to see a priestess. She was a short, plump woman, and she appeared to be giving him a sponge bath. When she saw that he was awake, she smiled at him. There, dear." She hushed him to be still, even though he hadn't yet moved. "The white rose has eradicated the filthy weeds from our cult, so you are safe in my care. Yes, I am confirming we were indeed a cult under Father Gekosh, and fully aware of it. But with the white rose back, we will now return to the way we are supposed to be." Her hands didn't stop in their task as she spoke. "I am Thorn, one of many, and I am very pleased to have been given the honor of watching over you until you woke from the awakening feed. I wasn't sure what your favorite scents were, though I hardly suppose anyone can go wrong with roses. Do you like it? I made it myself. It helped having something productive to do so." Lunreth concluded that she was a very chatty lady. As she continued to wash him, they were soon joined by a man, who was eagerly sent to tell the rose her champion had awoken. Thorn told him that he had slept for 4 days, and that his friends were all well, all except for the priestess who'd read from the book. Apparently, her god has dropped her like a hot potato and taken his gifted magic back, along with revoking her sacred rites. The woman sighed condescendingly, dropping her cloth into the bowl of now cooling water, and moved it off to the side. Obviously, he was an inferior being, she decided pointedly, and turned to gather up some clothes that certainly didn't belong to Lunreth, though she would broach no argument from him as she prepared to dress him. The White Rose would have understood the situation, and never have blamed the poor girl for something so entirely out of her control. She continued to prattle, hefting the man up to sit with surprisingly little effort, and began putting him into a suit. She has yet to see the light and pledge herself to the White Rose, but maybe the wound of the abandonment is still too fresh. It will all work out though, I am sure. The suit was so tailored, Lunreth was decidedly uncomfortable in the knowledge that someone had probably taken his measurements while he was unconscious, though he felt a little better when a belt with his swords was wrapped around his waist. "I have absolutely no doubt that your priestess will feel the pull of faith again, as all followers do. She will need something to believe in after all." The woman smoothed out the lapels of his jacket, her hands following the flowing embroidery of roses, and stepped back to survey her handiwork. She nodded approvingly. "Yes, you clean up quite nicely, champion." Irenka was the first to see him, sprinting around a corner and directly into his arms as Thorn was taking him to see the risen goddess. Considering the number Nimue had done on her, Mouse looked remarkably well. Thank the gods above and below, she still had all her teeth. Thorn prattled off the strength of the one healer remaining, now that their White Rose was back, while Irenka babbled about how she feared her brother was dead, and hugged him so tightly that breathing became difficult. The bones in the walls cried with her, echoing her wails. He hugged her tightly in return and picked the girl off her feet to move them quickly after Thorn, who had gestured them to follow. The bones begged to be freed from their prison, but they were compelled into silence once more when the doors closed, blocking the hallway from sight. It was only once they got to a pair of great doors on the 3rd floor and Thorn insisted Lunreth put her down, that he got a proper look at his sister. The girl had been reclothed in a mass of pleated black fabric, embellished with meters of lace and embroidered with roses in strategic places. He looked down at himself and realized that they were somewhat matched in borrowed attire. And so had the doctor and Nemu. The doors opened wide to reveal a grand dining room. Their host sat at the head of the long table, and roses flowered in every corner of the room, driving away the scent of rotten iron that had pervaded the space before. She was what one might describe as the ideal Melanian lady. Her hair was shiny and tumbled long down her back, with slender facial and body features, though well endowed where appropriate. The white rose's skin was smooth, unreal, and her pink lips turned up into a delightful smile when she laid almond-shaped eyes on him. There was an older man next to her, and he stopped talking when she acknowledged their entry. The rose's attention was entirely diverted by the appearance of her champion. A smile crawled across her face. Yes, the fangs were still there.
"Thorn,"
she purred to the man.
"See it done that a great feast is prepared tonight to celebrate the reawakening of my champion."
The man bowed to her deeply and quickly gathered the papers that had been set before her. He offered the same deep bow to Lunreth, and, not knowing what else to do, the sailor returned the gesture. "No!" The rose's demand reverberated dangerously around the room, and the air cooled to near freezing. Shadows ebbed behind the flowers, and the scent of blood touched the air.
"You bow to no one but me, my champion,"
she commanded firmly. Lunreth's back instantly snapped straight up. The shadows retreated, and the floral scent took over once more as the woman's smile returned.
"Irinka, dear, bring your brother to me. I have not fed this morning, and I am naturally famished."
Lunreth felt the girl's hesitancy as Irinka's hand took his, and saw the signs of fear in her face when she looked up at him. He offered her a reassuring smile, and went willingly. He didn't know the plan, but this was a role he knew how to play, even if he hated falling back into it. He tried not to think about it as he walked past the table. Dr. Grosquares greeted him cheerfully. Nemu may as well have been a doll, dressed all pretty as she was, but with a faraway stare, like her body may have been in the room, but her mind was far away. Lunreth hoped she would not become like Trissy. It would be a damn shame. He was surprised when the rose stood and directed him into her seat. He sat, but his sister would not be persuaded to release his hand, not even when the rose replaced herself in his lap.
"Artist,"
she hummed, tangling a hand in Lunreth's hair and tilting his head to the side.
"Tell my champion my story while I breakfast. I have little desire to explain it again."
Dr. Grosquares actually laughed at her command.
"Lady Rosalyn, it is not good form to lie simply because you will not curb your hunger for my handsome friend."
Lunreth felt the answering smile in her lips where they brushed against his skin in a kiss.
"You will tell it anyway,"
she chuckled, her breath cool on his neck.
"No doubt, with wondrous elaborations of your own."
"Indeed, indeed."
The man laughed as she inserted her fangs into Lunreth's pulse. He flinched at the pain, and she purred happily as she began to drink.
Our beautiful host, Lady Rosalyn Nightshade, had once been mortal.
The doctor began with a flourish.
The daughter of a well-to-do noble in Jinsia, an earl as a matter of fact. By the time she was 19, her adventurous spirit had taken her to forming an acquaintance with a foreign gentleman, who had naturally taken a desperate liking to her. She had not cared much for him at first, but she had fallen for him when he imported an entire garden's worth of white roses for her to Milan. Even her overly protected father had seen the sense in allowing their courtship to progress.
Lunreth felt his sister squeeze his hand, and he squeezed hers back in return. The movement made the woman in his lap drink more deeply.
They were married under a full moon, and naturally, anybody who was anybody had been in attendance. The Duke of Pesa and his mistress, the Countess of Rasoria and all her sons and daughters, the esteemed Lord and Lady Turnadil. Even the Prince of Palox had travelled the length of the continent to congratulate her personally and mourn his not meeting her first. She was naturally sensitive to the prince's plight, but her husband had swept her up into a dance that would put even the most famed dancier to shame. It was something out of a dream.
The doctor sighed wistfully at the tale, but then his tone shifted dramatically.
Until a scant 6 months later, when her once adoring husband showed his true colors. The horrible man had stolen her fortune and turned into a monster. His biggest mistake was underestimating her. He truly should have known better. Before his transformation from doting suitor to attempted master, Lady Rosalyn had discovered his secret. Locked up in an attic that she was forbidden from entering, as though anyone could deny her anything, she had found her husband's bastard son, a pitiful creature the man had tortured to the point of enlightenment. He was the one who gave her the gift of immortality with his dying breath. After, she granted his wish and plunged a stake through his heart.
The gentleman leaned towards Lunreth, continuing the story with sympathetic earnest.
Left without a sire, the fledgling vampire had gorged herself on her staff and left her husband for last. Naturally, he had to pay for what he had done to her, and the atrocities she committed that night she could not be blamed for. You see, she had been heartbroken. Her dreams shattered, her innocence taken under false pretense, her purity now corrupted by the unworthy brute. Simply the saddest thing to ever befall any woman. She had left him a husk of a man, and her thorns had flocked to her from all corners, realizing her pain and naturally wishing to aid her in her time of need.
The doctor's eyes flickered to the woman of which he spoke, and his smile was that of a fond uncle.
With their devotion and gifts, her power grew, and their duty to kneel before her found itself falling into place. It was only then that she realized why she had been delivered such a tragic fate. It was because she had never been intended to be some man's wife, but a goddess to mortals. She took to her new role as though it was the most natural thing in the world. She was, of course, made for it. Who could deny it? Well, angels don't like it when beings become more powerful than them.
Lunreth felt the rose sneer against his skin at the mention of the angels. He tensed, fearing she might rip out his throat, but a calming hand on his neck and a soothing swipe of her tongue had them both settling back into the tale. His sister clutched at his hand worriedly, and he barely had time to notice that his fingers were going numb when the doctor continued.
The accursed creatures perished at Templar with this very cathedral. He was to come to her under the guise of a worshipper and declare it a gift to the most beautiful woman in the world. Naturally, she had been curious, and her garden of thorns had moved into the place with all the grandeur of a holiday. She had been unsatisfied with the holy imagery, but rather enjoyed the architecture. So she had the Templar destroyed for his thoughtless gift and made it up as she liked it.
And then that pesky little thing came along and stuck me through with a holy blade. The rose sighed, finally pulling away from her breakfast. and patting a hand through Lunreth's hair to give him her undivided attention. Close as they were now, he could see her eyes weren't actually black, but a deep maroon, and she trailed now warmer fingers over his features as she spoke.
My thorns valiantly subdued my murderer and locked him away to rot in the basement, as is only the proper place to put a rodent. But I was left to sleep for what felt like 400 years.
She plucked a napkin from the table and dabbed at Lunreth's neck.
That roach you met at my door was no thorn of mine. He came in here preaching I'd been revived in my home city, and may one day return to this body if they followed the new me's rules. Can you believe the audacity of that slimy little pig?
Lunreth tried to shake his head, but only managed to lull it more heavily against her arm. He felt so tired, but spellbound by her voice. He was compelled to listen.
But then you came along, my champion.
She smiled, cupping his face with tender hands. She laid his head to her chest and gazed down at him so endearingly.
You followed my flowers and brought with you a priestess strong enough to complete the spell to awaken me, an artist with the skills to give you my mark, and a little sister for me to dress up like I had before I was married. And then to have you and discover you are dragonkin like me. What a wonderful surprise, my champion.
She praised him elatedly.
Naturally, you are bound to be someone special. That is simply how things are for me. I have impeccable taste.
The statement had focus coming back into Nimu's eyes. Not that Lunreth would have noticed, though Irinka did. It was the most present the woman had been since she'd come back to herself at the awakening. The rose giggled, and her joy was evident in the turn of her lips.
Your watcher is with my crystal keeper,
she whispered like a secret. Only it was certainly loud enough for all at the table to hear.
In the floating islands of the north. He has vexed her so greatly.
She laughed and stroked Lunreth's cheek before booping him on the tip of his nose.
She is utterly besotted with him, but his heart appears to belong to another. You will return and tell me of his reactions, won't you, when you see him again?
Lunreth was surprised she could have known what she knew, but the fuzziness in his mind, naturally from blood loss and nothing else, had him nodding without questioning it. It was such a sweet reminder that she could not be blamed for taking a stroll through his life. The last two devilishly handsome men who had made her heart flutter had turned out to have bad intentions for her. Naturally, she would need to protect herself. But he was here now, and she would have to want for nothing ever again.
Simply marvelous.
The rose beamed and kissed her champion's forehead sweetly.
Now you must regain your strength,
she breathed as one of her hands travelled down his chest to settle over his heart.
You have a long journey ahead of you.
Her ladyship has offered to magic us to Galeka.
The artist offered in terms of context, which had Nimu drifting off and out of the conversation again.
Though she does need time to gather enough power to do so. After so long a sleep and having to deal with her false followers, she naturally needs to recover. As do you, my friend.
Dr. Grosquares nodded like it had already been decided.
1 week should be sufficient.
Lunreth felt his sister's grip on his hand tighten to the point her nails dug into his skin. Something felt off, though he was so sleepy. He couldn't quite bring himself to worry about it just at that moment.